Mark Rogers TV, always talking college football 24/7, 365. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel for my analysis, plus those from bloggers and broadcasters nationwide. We're bringing Steve Dace from Michigan Podcast to talk about the Wolverines' assignment next against the South Carolina Gamecocks in the Outback Bowl. Steve, how you doing today?
Doing well, Mark. It was 68 degrees in Des Moines, Iowa on December 4th, buddy, so life could be a lot worse.
Wow, bring some of that weather my way. You got to go about, let's see, about maybe 800 to 1,000 miles east of that to help me out. All right, Steve, before we dive into the Michigan-South Carolina matchup, I want to get your thoughts on the college football playoff. In seeing much of your Twitter feed, I think I have a pretty good read on it at this point, but still want to hear it straight from you in regards to, so I'm going to pose it two different ways. The process of the selection committee, the process that they go through, and if you think that that's flawed. And number two, this specific selection that they made, the decision, Ohio State, Alabama, USC.
They probably picked the four best teams, but they did not pick four most deserving teams. There is no intellectual case for picking Alabama. And what do I mean by that? When I say intellectual, I mean objective data. Ohio State's the only team in the country in the top 10 nationally in total offense and total defense. 3 wins better than any Alabama has. You know, I live in Iowa, so I'm very aware of the ugly loss they had to the Hawkeyes, but the same people that point that out also fail to recognize that they beat Michigan State, who's ranked 16th by 45 points. That's one of the most dominant wins a ranked team has against another in all of college football this season. So you would think that would sort of cancel out the Iowa loss, and then you throw in 2 top 10 wins. I mean, their resume is a lot better than Ohio State's. Alabama. Alabama's resume is not like Ohio State's was a year ago when they got in without winning their conference. Ohio State had wins over 3 top 10 teams last year. Alabama has none. In fact, Alabama's resume is the weakest of any team that's gotten in the playoffs so far. They have no top 10 wins, and they have no conference or division title. They're the only team with those 2 things. But subjectively, when I watch the tape, when I watch games, do I think they're better than Ohio State? Yeah. But I also don't think it's by a lot. I mean, to me, Jalen Hurts and J.T. Barrett are kind of the same quarterback. I think Ohio State's defensive line is better. I think Alabama's linebackers, when they're healthy, are better. Secondary is about the same. Offensive line's about the same. I think, J.K. Dobbins might be better than any running back Alabama has, but Alabama's got 4 guys in a unit that are better than the unit Ohio State has. It's pretty close. You know, I think I saw on a neutral field Vegas make it about a 3 or 4 point game, and the favorite doesn't win in college football all the time anyway, especially when you're, at that around 5 points or less. So, subjectively, I think they picked the 4 best teams. But in terms of all the objective criteria they list, they did not. And I would caution everybody watching and listening to not draw huge conclusions from what happened here for 2 reasons. One, we've had the RPI in college basketball since 1993. That's almost 25 years ago. We've had the 64-team plus field in college basketball since 1985. That's almost 40 years ago. So, or almost 35 years ago, I mean. So that means we have enough data to determine trend lines. We're only in year 4 of the college football playoff. So I don't think we have any trend lines yet. That's number 1. We don't have enough data. Number 2, I think if any other team in the SEC, and I mean any other team, including huge brand names like Florida, LSU, if they had the exact same resume Alabama did, they would not have gotten in. I really think all that really happened here is they watched Ohio State lose 31-0 when they put him in last year. They watched Ohio State get blown up by Iowa. They were afraid, let's put Miami in the Orange Bowl against, or Alabama in the Orange Bowl against Miami. They beat them by 3 touchdowns. Clemson beats Ohio State again, and we look like fools because we clearly didn't pick the 4 best teams. And I think they just got together. I think it's a rep that Alabama has largely earned. This is an unprecedented dominance, 5 national championships in 9 years. And I think they just got together and just looked each other in the eye and said, do we really believe Alabama, who we ranked 1 or 2 every week until last week, is really not one of the 4 best teams? Then let's put the 4 best teams in. I think the only precedent that was set here, Mark, was roll tide. I wouldn't schedule a week. If you think a week non-conference schedule helps you, ask TCU and Baylor about that. I don't think it's 2 losses. Auburn was number 2 with 2 losses, which means they would have been in the playoff had they beaten Georgia on Saturday. I think it just came down to Alabama has its own transcendent standard apart from the normal methodologies of college football, which they have largely earned with their on-field performance, and that's why they got us the benefit of the doubt. I don't think right now any other program in college football would have received.
So it's definitely reasonable thinking on your part based on the evidence that we have. But I'm hoping, Steve, I'm believing what you're saying, but I'm hoping better than that. What I'm hoping is that they're not going the way of the NFL or NBA team that makes a certain draft selection because they can justify it better to their fan base or to the media, and it's going to, if it goes sour, not make them look as bad as doing what they believe is the right selection. Or a manager or coach who makes a certain switch or a certain lineup change or switches out a pitcher during a game, not because he believes that that's the best move, but it's the safest choice when things go wrong to be able to justify. I hope that's not the case. I also hope that the brand name doesn't come into play. I, like you, based on the evidence, believe that it does, but it shouldn't in any way. I also, like you, am seemingly the only person out there that has mentioned the Michigan State game as being the outlier to the Iowa game. I have heard this Iowa game. This game is brought up more than probably 50 times more than any other game during the 2017 college football season, but it has not been countered by the Michigan State game being a top 15 win. And if we're going to rate losses based on not just the result of the game, but the dominance displayed by the team or the ugliness of the loss, then we have to do the same according to the wins. And Alabama does not have a win against Michigan, a Michigan State type. They have the LSU and Mississippi State games that are comparable to the Michigan State win, but not comparable to that performance or score.
I think there's a little bit of, well, I completely agree with what you said at the end. That's why I brought up the Sparty canceling out Iowa thing. They made a projection. They made a projection based off of what they'd seen it from Ohio State in the playoff last year. And I don't even think just Ohio State in the playoff last year. Mark, the Big Ten won the first playoff and hasn't scored a point in the last 2. And, 2 years ago, Ohio State in 2015 was a lot like Alabama this year. Not a lot of quality wins. Schedule didn't turn out to be as tough as they thought. They had the bad loss, which they rebounded from the very next week when they both raced my Wolverines. But when we got to the end, they chose the 4 most deserving. I think, if Ohio State had played Alabama in that bowl game instead of Michigan State, would they have won? I don't know, but I'm pretty confident it wouldn't have been 38-0 when you're rolling Ezekiel Elliott and all those guys that are now in the NFL. And so I think that's exactly what I think. The perception of where the Big Ten is at, and get into that with its mercurial play, allow the Alabama factor. Now, I don't think it was their brand, because Ohio State is a very powerful brand. I think it was their rep. That we all know how talented they are. We all know how well they coach, or how well they recruit. And I think there was a fear of, are we going to really leave the most talented team at home? And, the Big Ten the last 2 years in a row gave us non-competitive games. I really think that had a lot to do with it. I think if Wisconsin was 13-0, they would have been in anyway, and that would have canceled out the Alabama factor. But once the Alabama factor came into play, I really just think they just sat down and decided there's no way they're not one of the 4 best teams. I think it's just that simple.
And I also have issue with what you just stated in regards to selecting the best team. So we keep hearing that mantra as being the the goal of the committee. Well, none of us know who the four best teams are. Obviously, we don't. Anyone who pretends that they know the four best teams, we should be selecting the four best resumes. I can state who I believe are the four best teams, but if we go back to that 2015 season, certainly in retrospect, and even at the moment, basically all of college football nation that knows talent believed Ohio State, despite the result in Columbus against Sparty, was better than Michigan State. So you know what? Make a stand then and say, we're selecting the four best teams. This is basically an NFL team that's going to have two rookies of the year, offensive and defensive, in the NFL next season. This team can compete.
That was only year two. They're evolving too. And in year two, the idea that you were going to take a team that beat you head to head and won the outright conference championship and has the same record and leave them home would have been nuts. Would have been nuts. No one thought that that Michigan State should not have been in. No one did. So they if there's any criticism of this committee, well, there's several. They're not transparent enough. We don't really know what their formula for gauging strength of schedule is because they won't tell us. They don't publicize the last ballot of the year, which I think they should do. But the one thing I don't think we can criticize them for is attempting to learn on the fly. Is what they did with Ohio State in 2015 now look hypocritical compared to what they did with Alabama this year? Yes, but that's hindsight. We didn't know that in 2015. Now we have a new precedent to hold them to. I would advise no other team in college football, right, for the foreseeable future, to believe their path to the playoff is to not make it to championship weekend and have no top 10 wins. I don't think anybody else other than Alabama gets away with that because no one else has the stature their program has right now. I don't think that's a recipe of success for anyone else.
Fair enough, Steve, on the 2015 argument, because at the time I certainly stated Ohio State's the better team, but they should not be in the playoff because Michigan State beat them head-to-head, then marched on to the Big Ten championship. Similarly to the 2011 situation in which I believed Oklahoma State should have been playing LSU in the BCS championship game, even though I would have bet my mortgage on LSU and Alabama winning or competing in a 32 or 64 team tournament against Oklahoma State. I still thought that the justification was there for Oklahoma State, and then in 2015, Michigan State, and in last year's situation, Penn State, even though I thought Ohio State had the better resume and were the better team overall.
Yeah, 2011, you have a really good argument because everybody compares 2011 to 2006 with Michigan and Ohio State, but the difference is Alabama lost that game to LSU at home. They lost that game to LSU at home and then got the benefit of the down. So the argument in 2006 was Michigan had to go play in Columbus, lose by 3. You know, what happens if they play on a neutral field? Well, that's not the same as what happened with Alabama. And so you're right, Alabama got a huge benefit of the doubt, courtesy of the BCS, and that was only picking 2 teams. And then, of course, they go out to the national championship game and they boat race LSU